Hello everyone, this is Upender Joshi, your English teacher, and today we are going to do a second chapter from your book Hornbill. The name of the chapter is We Are Not Afraid to Die If We Can All Be Together, and this chapter has been written by Gordon Cook and Ellen East. Let me give you an overview about the chapter. This chapter is about a brave British family that undertook around the world voyage. So voyage here means sea journey. As they entered southern Indian Ocean, their boat was trapped in a fierce storm. The entire crew and the family showed unprecedented courage. So let's see how they faced the fierce storm. So this story is about a British family that showed unprecedented courage while their boat was trapped in a sea storm. So let's see how they faced the sea storm. So again, each slide has two sections, this section and this section. So this is the text of the chapter, and here alongside the portion of the text, you will have a picture giving you an idea or an imagery about the text, right? So let's start the chapter. In July 1976, my wife Mary, son Jonathan, who was 6 years old, daughter Suzanne, who was 7 years old, and I the narrator, set sail from Plymouth, England, to duplicate the round the world voyage made 200 years ago by Captain James Cook. So, this is the beginning. The narrator, along with his family, started a sea journey from Plymouth in England, right? The purpose behind this journey was that he wanted to give a tribute to the famous sailor Captain James Cook, who had 200 years ago made a round the world journey, right? Sea journey. So that is why he undertook this journey. For the longest time, Mary and I, a 37-year-old businessman, had dreamt of sailing in the wake of the famous explorer, and for the past 16 years, we had spent all our leisure time honing our seafaring skills in British waters. So, the second, line uh, tells कि Mary, we already know sailor's wife. Here, the sailor, that is the narrator, he was a 37-year-old businessman. He had always dreamed, it was his dream to do this round the world sea journey, to duplicate the, great effort made by Captain James Cook 200 years ago. So this was their desire, burning desire to do this round the world sea journey. And for the past 16 years, the narrator, along with his wife and family, had honed means improved their seafaring skills. Seafaring skills means uh, sailing skills means how they will sail, uh, or how will they make that round the world sea journey. So they had practiced for 16 years in the British waters. British waters means the sea surrounding the British islands, right? So that is quite a rough sea. So they had practiced a lot for 16 years in order to prepare themselves for the difficult task of completing the sea journey. Our boat, Wave Walker, a 23-meter, 30-ton wooden-hulled beauty, had been professionally built, and we had spent months fitting it out and testing it in the roughest weather we could find. So, for this purpose, they got a special boat built, and the name of the boat was Wave Walker. They gave the boat name Wave Walker, and it was 23 meter long, right? and it was all made up of wood, and it had been professionally built, right? And then they practiced in this boat for 16 years, right, in the roughest weather. So after practicing, they started the journey, right, in 1976. The first leg of our planned 3 year 1,05,000 kilometer journey passed pleasantly as we sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. So, they completed the first leg of their journey by covering 1,05,000 kilometers from England. They reached to the coast of Africa, Cape Town, which is in South Africa. So they halted at Cape Town for a short while. So there, before heading east, we took on two crewmen, American Larry Vigil and Swiss Herb Segler. So at the Cape Town, the narrator, hired two professional sailors. One of them was American and the other was Swiss, right? To help us tackle one of the world's roughest seas, the Southern Indian Ocean. Now, why did he hire two professional sailors? Because from Cape Town onwards, they had to enter the Southern Indian Ocean, and Southern Indian Ocean is known as the roughest sea in the world. So they needed some professional sailors to sail through the roughest uh, Southern Indian Ocean. So to be on the safer side, he hired two professional sailors. So on our second day out of Cape Town, we began to encounter strong gales. Now gales here means very strong winds. So they had hardly gone out of Cape Town when they started feeling strong winds. For the next few weeks they blew continuously, and gales did not worry me. But the size of the waves was alarming, up to 15 meters, as high as our main mast. So you see, the strong wind was not the problem. The problem was the high waves. So there, they were encountering, they were, facing some very high waves, and the size of the waves is even, written. It was 15 meter, that is approximately 45 feet tall waves, and as high as our main mast. Mast actually is a pole on the boat to which a sail is tied, right? So December 25 found us 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. So on December 25, that is on Christmas, they had gone 3,500 kilometers away from Cape Town. So despite atrocious weather, atrocious here means rough weather, very difficult weather, we had a wonderful holiday complete with the Christmas tree. So they celebrated their Christmas uh, on the boat, and their boat was surrounded by very tall waves. New Year's Day saw no improvement in the weather, and they also celebrated their New Year on the wave walker, and the weather did not improve, right? But we reasoned that it had to soon change, and they kept discussing. That is, all the people on the boat. Approximately, there were not approximately exactly there were six people on the boat, four family members of the narrator, including him, and two professional sailors, right? And it did change. And after a few days, the weather changed, but it changed for the worse. That is, the weather became worse from bad. So at dawn on January 2, the waves were gigantic. Gigantic means very big. So after celebrating their new year, on January 2, right? Dawn means morning. The waves became very big. So we were sailing with only a small storm jib and were still making 8 knots, right? So jib here means a very small sail. Now what is sail? Sail is a cloth attached to the mast means this is the mast, the pole, right? So they were having only one storm jib, that is a very small jib, and their speed was 8 knots, right? So what is a knot? Knot here is a unit for measuring the speed of boats and aircraft, or 1 nautical mile, right, per hour. 1 nautical mile per hour. So the boat was making 8 uh, 8 knots per hour. So that was the speed, right? As the ship rose to the top of each wave, we could see endless enormous seas rolling towards us, and the screaming of the wind and spray was painful to the ears. So their boat was moving through the stormy waves like this, you can see. So whenever the boat went on the top of uh, the wave, they could see all around them a stormy sea, right? The wind was blowing very fast, and the spray of the water was drenching them all. So to slow the boat down, we dropped the storm jib and lashed a heavy mooring rope in a loop across the stern. So in order to reduce the speed of the boat further, they took off even that storm jib. Jib means small sail. And in order to further slow the speed of the boat, they tied here. This is the stern, this is the front part, which is called prow. This is called stern. So they tied, uh, you know, uh, a rope in the round and round the stern in order to reduce the speed of the boat further. Right? Stern, kindly note down, is the hind part of the ship or the boat. So then we double lash everything. Double lash means double tied everything. Went through the life raft drill. Now they've started preparing for the worst, because the storm could become worse any moment. So they practiced life raft drill. Now what is a life raft drill? On every boat there is a small lifeboat, right, which in the worst scenarios can be used to save the crew. So they practiced that life raft drill. Attach lifelines, that is, they tied lifelines to themselves. Lifelines are actually strong ropes which the sailors tie around their belt to save themselves, uh, or to face the turbulent sea waters. Donned oilskins, they put on their waterproof clothes and life jackets, and they also put on their life jacket. Life jacket actually is a jacket which saves you from drowning. And they waited for what? Waited for the storm. So the first indication of impending disaster came at about 6 p.m. So you see, the first indication of the storm came at 6 p.m. Impending means which might happen soon in future. Disaster here is storm. With an ominous silence. You see, at 6 p.m. everything became silent. This is called the silence before the storm, right? The wind dropped. Look, the wind stopped, and the sky immediately grew dark. That is, the sky was covered with dark clouds. Then came a growing roar, and then, after a few moments of silence, came a roar. Roar means noise, and nobody knew what that noise was. And an enormous cloud towered aft of the ship, and the narrator saw that uh, quite far away a huge cloud was coming towards them. Actually, it was not a cloud. You will come to know what it was. Right right Aft means aft, the behind, the hind part of the ship. The noise was coming from behind the ship or the boat, and with horror I realized that it was not a cloud, but a wave like no other I had ever seen. And as the author or the narrator focused on that cloud, he realized that it was not a cloud, it was a huge wave like this. You see, this is the boat and this is the wave. It appeared perfectly vertical and almost twice the height of other waves. So you see, this wave was 30 meter high. The other waves were 15 meters high. So this wave was 30 meters high. 30-meter high means 90 feet high. So you can imagine how high 90 feet are. And with a frightful breaking crest. So this is the crest of the wave. This is called the crest, the top part of the wave. And its crest was very, very frightening. So the roar increased to a thunder as the stern moved up the face of the wave, and for a moment I thought we might ride over it. So that tall wave kept coming closer to the hind part of the boat, and author thought that the boat would survive the wave. But no, he was wrong. But then a tremendous explosion shook the deck, and then the wave struck the boat, and there was an explosion means a big sudden noise, and the entire boat was shaken. So you can see this is how the wave struck the boat, right? Kindly note down, this is not the exact picture. This is a representation of the uh, you know of what actually must have happened, right? So a torrent means large amount of water. Green and white water broke over the ship. My head smashed into the wheel, and I was aware of flying overboard and sinking below the waves. So you see the power of the wave. The wave struck the boat, and uh, the narrator was standing on the deck, steering the boat, and he was thrown away by the power of the wave into the ocean. And you must be remembering that he had tied a rope to his belt that saved him. So you see, I accepted my approaching death. So he started sinking in the sea, and as I was losing consciousness, I felt quite peaceful. So you see, as he was you know going down the sea water, he felt quite peaceful. So unexpectedly my head popped out of the water, but something unexpected happened. That is, he did not sink. uh, uh, Quite contrary, his head came out of the water. Popped out means came out of water. I A few meters away, wave walker was near capsizing. Capsizing means drowning, about to sink below the water. So her masts almost horizontal. Mast, I have already told you, these poles are called mast. They were horizontal. You can imagine. Now they are vertical here, and the wave that had struck the wave walker, it had made the mast perpendicular like this, right? Then a wave hurled her upright. Then another wave made the wave walker, straight again. My lifeline jerked taut. Taut means tight. So, as the boat became upright again on the surface of the water, the rope that was attaching, a lifeline that was attaching the narrator to the boat became tight. I grabbed the guardrails and sailed through the air into Wave Walker's main boom. Right? So he climbed the Wave Walker again, and subsequent waves tossed me around the deck like a rag doll. Again, he was tossed here and there on the deck like a rag doll. My left ribs cracked. You see, the waves injured him also. My mouth filled with blood and broken teeth. Somehow I found the wheel, lined up the stern for the next wave, and hung on. But in spite of being injured, badly injured, he, caught hold of the wheel and tried to steer the boat in such a manner that the next wave would not, strike the boat dangerously. So this was the condition of the boat uh, amid the storm. You see, water, water everywhere. I could feel that the ship had water below, but I dared not abandon the wheel to investigate. Right? So now the author knew that the sea water had, entered the boat. There was water, water everywhere inside the boat, but still he could not, abandon the wheel. Abandon means leave the steering wheel and go down the decks to see the damage done by the wave. Suddenly the front hatch was thrown open and Mary appeared. And at that very moment, Mary, narrator's wife, came, right? And she shouted, "We are sinking. So the decks are smashed. We are full of water." That is what she said. So narrator's wife confirmed the narrator's doubts that the boat had been badly damaged and there was water inside the boat. And if that water was not taken outside, and if that hole through which the water was entering the boat was not repaired, they would certainly drown. So immediately the author said, "Take the wheel." I shouted as I scrambled for the hatch, and Larry and Herb were pumping like madmen. So you see, Larry and Herb, those professional sailors, they were already doing their duty. They had started pumping the water that had come inside the boat, out of the boat. So broken timbers hung at crazy angles. So everywhere, I have already told you the boat was made up of wood. So the here and there the timber was broken. The whole starboard side bulged. Now starboard side, pay attention, this is a sailor's term. The boat has two sides, starboard side and port side. So the starboard side, kindly pay attention, is the side of a ship or an aircraft that is on the right when you are facing forward. So the right side of the boat. And here is the port side, see.
Port.
So port side is the left side, right? Here I show you. Here, up the side of a ship or aircraft that is on the left side. So the whole right side bulged. Bulged means broken inwards. Clothes, crockery, charts, tins, and toys sloshed about in deep water. So since the water was everywhere inside the boat, so these things were, floating inside the boat: clothes, crockery, charts, tins, and toys. I half swam, half crawled into the children's cabin, and he immediately went to children's cabin and he asked his children, "Are you all right?" I asked. Yes, they answered, from an upper bunk. Now, what is a bunk? Bunk is a bed attached to wall, right? So but my head hurts a bit, said Sue. So you see, author's daughter had been injured and her head was hurting her, right? So pointing to a big bump above her eyes, and her eyes were swollen and there was a swelling above her eyes. So I had no time to worry about bumped heads, and that was an emergency situation. The author's first priority was to plugged the hole through which the water was coming inside the boat. So the author did not pay attention to that swelling or that swollen head. So he immediately went. After finding a hammer, screws, and canvas, I struggled back to deck. Right? So you see, author took the hammer, screws, and canvas, and he went back to the deck with the starboard side bashed open, and he saw that the right side of the boat had been broken. So we were taking water with each wave that broke over us, and the water was coming, in big volume inside the boat. If I couldn't make some repairs, we would surely sink. And the author and his crew, had very little time. If they did not make any repairs, the boat would sink. Somehow I managed to stretch canvas and secure waterproof hatch covers across the gaping holes. So somehow the narrator or the author, uh, you know, uh, repaired those holes by putting the waterproof covers on those holes. Some water continued to stream below, but most of it was now being deflected over the side. So the repairs did some, help. They stopped the water coming from uh, inside, but they just helped only a little bit. They stopped the water from coming in, but still the leaks were there. More problems arose when our hand pump started to block up with the debris. Now, what is debris? Debris is the waste, the unwanted material that was, floating inside the boat, right? So a problem developed. The pumps that were working so well, that debris, choked those pumps, right? And around the cabins, and the electric pump short circuited, and the electric pump, due to water, there was short circuit. Short circuit means the fuse was blown, so the water level rose threateningly, right? And the water, now since the pump stopped working, the water was coming in, the level in the boat started rising. Back on deck, I found that our two spare hand pumps had been wrenched overboard, along with the forestaysail, the jib, and the dinghies, and the main anchor, right? So on the deck, he saw that uh, Larry and Herb, they had started using the hand pumps, and they were pumping the water out of the boat using those hand pumps. Then I remembered we had another electric pump under the chart room floor. So the author remembered he had a spare electric pump. So he brought it and connected it to an out pipe, and was thankful to find that it worked. And thankfully, that spare electric pump was working. So the night dragged on with an endless, bitterly cold routine of pumping. So the entire night, all the family members and the crew members, they kept working, pumping the water out, steering and working the radio. And the author also sent some help calls. We were getting no replies to our Mayday calls. Kindly note down, Mayday calls are help calls, like emergency numbers. They are help calls for rescue. So these Mayday calls are received by any ship that is near them, and then that ship comes to their rescue. But their Mayday calls were not being answered, because they were at a place where their radio was not getting any signal. So which was not surprising in this remote corner of the world. And Sue's head had swollen alarmingly. So you see, his daughter, the narrator's daughter's head had been becoming, swollen more and more, and it had become alarmingly swollen. She had two enormous black eyes, and now she showed us a deep cut on her arm, and there was a cut on her arm also. When I asked why she hadn't made more of her injuries before this, she replied, I didn't want to worry you when you were trying to save us all. So the narrator asked his daughter कि why she didn't tell about her injuries before. So she said she didn't want to upset anybody, because everybody was trying to save the boat. By morning on January 3, the pumps had the water level sufficiently under control for us to take 2 hours rest in rotation. So you see, by the morning on January 3, the situation was under control. They had pumped enough water out of the boat. Now they could take rest in rotation. So they started taking rest in rotation, and turn by turn they took 2 hours rest. But we still had a tremendous leak somewhere below the waterline, and on checking I found that nearly all the boat's main rib frames were smashed down to the keel. And you know, after the situation became a bit normal, the narrator checked, and he found that their entire boat had been badly damaged. That is, the main section that held the boat together, that section is called keel, that had been badly damaged, and they needed to reach an island or a land uh, pretty soon. And in case they didn't reach, their entire boat would drown. In fact, there was nothing holding up a whole section of the starboard hull except a few cupboard partitions. And if there were not, some cupboards lying in the starboard side, it would have broken entirely. So those cupboards were, holding the boat together. So we had survived for 15 hours since the wave hit, but wave walker wouldn't hold together long enough for us to reach Australia. So the nearest country uh, from the place where their boat at that point was Australia, and Australia was very very far away, and they needed a miracle to reach Australia, or they needed some island to reach before Australia in order to survive. So I checked our charts and calculated that there were two small islands a few hundred kilometers to the east. And then the narrator did some, calculations on the charts, and he found that there were two small islands which were a few hundred kilometers towards the east, and one of them was Isle Amsterdam, which was a French scientific base. So our only hope was to reach these pinpricks, that is very small islands in the vast ocean. So the narrator's only hope was that Isle Amsterdam, right? And if they didn't reach Isle Amsterdam, their boat would surely sink into the sea, right? But unless the wind and seas abated, so we could hoist sail, our chances would be slim indeed. And there was another problem. Uh, in order to reach those islands, they needed to raise their sail, right? And they also needed the seas to abate. Abate means to become calm, right? So the great wave had put our auxiliary engine out of action because their extra engine had been damaged by that big wave. So they needed the sea to become calm, and then they needed to raise the sail so that the boat could move towards the Isle Amsterdam. So on January 4, after 36 hours of continuous pumping, we reached the last few centimeters of water. So you see, the pumps worked continuously for 36 hours to make the water level come down. Now we had only to keep pace with the water still coming in. Now the water from the leaks was coming in, but they were successfully pumping that water out. So we could not set any sail on the main mast. So since the wave had badly damaged the entire boat, the boat had become quite weak. So they could not set the big sail on the mast. Mast is this pole, So, because if they would set a sail here, the wind would strike the sail and there would be pressure on the mast and the mast could break. And mast is attached to the other sections of the boat, and the boat could, disintegrate. So they didn't put up any sail. So pressure on the rigging would simply pull the damaged section of the hull apart. So we hoisted the storm jib. Storm jib is the small sail, and headed for where I thought the two islands were. And now with the help of the storm jib, they started moving towards those islands. Sorry, not those islands, only one island, Isle Amsterdam. Mary found some corned beef and cracker biscuits. So you see, after 36 hours, they ate something, right? Uh, and we ate our first meal in almost 2 days. But our respite was short lived. Respite here is uh, a period of relaxation. So you see, their relaxation was just very short lived. At 4 p.m., black clouds again began building up behind us. The weather again became bad. Black clouds started building up in the sky, and within the hour, the wind was back to 40 knots. The wind again became very fast. 40 knots is a very, a threatening speed for a boat, and the wind was blowing at 40 knots and the seas were getting higher. So the waves also started becoming taller and taller. The weather continued to deteriorate throughout the night, and by the morning on January 5, our situation was again desperate. So they were heading towards another, sea storm, and now their boat was sure to break if any big wave struck the boat. So when I went to comfort the children, John asked. John is, narrator's 6-year-old son. So John asked, Daddy, are we going to die? So I tried to assure him that we could make it. So the narrator, tried to pacify his son's doubts and said, Beta, no, no, we will not die. But, John further asked, or rather said, Daddy, we are not afraid of dying if we can all be together. You and Mummy, Sue and I. So you see how brave that 6-year-old son was. He said he was not afraid of dying if they could all die together in a family. So I could find no words with which to respond, but I left the children's cabin determined to fight the sea with everything I had. So, this small conversation with his son, further motivated the narrator to fight the coming sea storm with all he had, right? So he determined when to fight the sea with everything he had. So to protect the weakened starboard side, so the author made a plan. And what was that plan for the coming storm? The starboard side had been broken, so he decided to cover the starboard broken side by putting some barrels of paraffin, right? So he decided to heave to with the undamaged port hull facing the oncoming waves. So this is what he made the plan. The plan was, the moment any big wave would come, he would, face that wave with the undamaged side, that is the port side, that is the left side of the boat, right? So using an improvised sea anchor of heavy nylon rope and two 12-liter plastic barrels of paraffin. So that evening Mary and I sat together, holding hands as the motion of the ship brought more and more water in through the broken planks. So we both felt the end was very near. So after making all the preparations, that is, uh, attaching the barrels of paraffin to the weaker side and making the arrangements to face the storm, that evening, the narrator sat with his wife, hand in hands, and both of them were quite emotional at that time because the water was coming inside the boat in large amounts, and they felt the end of the boat was quite near. That is, they would drown, their entire family would drown, and their life will be in danger. So they were very sad and they were holding hands of each other. But quite an unexpected thing happened. The wave walker rode out the storm, and by the morning of January 6, with the wind easing, I tried to get a reading on the sextant. Sextant actually is an instrument used to, uh, measure the distances or to find out certain locations on the sea. These days we have everything digital on the ships, but in those days GPS system computers were not so much in use. So everything was done manually. So sextant was a very important instrument used for navigation, in those times. So you see, on January 6, the situation became quite favorable for them. The wind speed became less, the waves became, uh, you know, less threatening. The sea became calm. So the narrator went to the chart room to, work on some navigational directions. So back in the chart room, I worked on wind speed, changes of course, drift and current in an effort to calculate our position. So he did some calculations to find out where exactly the boat at that time was and how far the Isle of Amsterdam was. So the best I could determine was that their boat was somewhere in 1,50,000 kilometers of ocean, and they were looking for a 65-kilometer wide island. So you see, it's a very complicated situation. They were in a sea that was 1,50,000 kilometer big. The ocean was 1,50,000 kilometers vast, and in such a big or vast area, they had to find an island that was only 65-kilometer wide. So you see, it was a very big achievement. It was exactly like finding a needle in a big ground of grass. So suppose a needle gets lost in a very big ground of uh, of any football or cricket, then you have to find that needle. It was as difficult. So while I was thinking, Sue is the daughter, moving painfully joined me. So the left side of her head was now very swollen and her blackened eyes narrowed to slits. Now the swelling of her head had become deteriorated. So the swelling had not stopped, swelling was increasing, and now her eyes had become closed. So in that situation, she came to her father. She gave me a card she had made, and see this, the daughter had made a card for her dad. On the front side, on the front, she had drawn caricatures. Caricatures means cartoon type of Mary and me with the words. So she had, made a caricature of her mother and her dad. And on the card, she had written, "Here are some funny people. Did they make you laugh? I laughed a lot as well." And inside was a message, "Oh, how I love you both." So this card is to say thank you and let's hope for the best, right? So this card she gave to her dad, and the message in the card further made the narrator determined to make the best efforts to help the boat reach Isle as Amsterdam. So you see, somehow we had to make it mean somehow he had to make the boat reach the Isle Amsterdam. So I checked and rechecked my calculations. We had lost our main compass and I was using a spare which had not been corrected for magnetic variation. So you see, the big storm had damaged so many navigational tools of the author. So his main compass had been damaged and he used an old compass which had not been, you know, calibrated, or whose magnetic field had not been corrected. So I made an allowance for this and another estimate of the influence of the westerly currents which flow through this part of the Indian Ocean. So uh, using the tools he had, which were not even the best tools, the narrator again made calculations and made an estimate, uh, right, uh, regarding at what time the boat will reach Isle Amsterdam. So about 2 p.m. I went on deck and asked Larry to steer a course of 185 degrees. So on the basis of his calculations, at 2 p.m. he requested Larry, the professional sailor, to steer a course of 185 degrees. That is to make the boat go towards one particular direction, right? Uh, so if we were lucky, I told him with a conviction I did not feel. So he told Larry that if he steered the boat uh, on 185 degrees, uh, and with luck the boat would reach Isle Amsterdam approximately at 5 p.m. Right? So then, with a heavy heart, I went below. So since the author was tired, he had been working, you know, ceaselessly, incessantly. So he went to have a nap. That is, he went for a short sleep. He climbed on his bunk and amazingly dozed off. And the moment he lay on the bunk, he fell asleep. So when I woke, it was 6 p.m. So you see, he woke after a gap of 4 hours. He means he had gone to the bunk at 2 p.m. and he woke up at 6 p.m. and it was growing dark. I knew we must have missed the island, and with the sail we had left, we couldn't hope to beat back into the westerly winds. So at that moment, a tousled head appeared by my bunk. Can I have a hug? Jonathan asked. Sue was right behind him. So at 6 p.m., he woke up quite sad that their boat must have missed the isle. But then both his son and daughter appeared, and the son asked, Dad, can I hug you? And Sue was right behind him. So the surprised father asked, Why am I getting a hug now? I asked. Because you are the best daddy in the world and the best captain, my son replied. So Jonathan replied that he wanted to hug him because he was the best daddy in the world, and more than that, he was the best captain in the world, right? So, not today, John, I am afraid. So the father was not sure why he was showing such a happiness. So he asked him, okay, okay, not today. We will not have the hug today. But Jonathan said, why? You must be, right? You are really the best daddy today and the best captain today. Why? I tell you why. You know, said Sue in a matter of fact voice. Matter of fact voice means not showing much emotion. She said, You found the island, Dad. What? I shouted. It is out there in front of us. So the entire family, rather, the entire crew was happy because the narrator's calculations had proved right. So the directions which he had given to Larry, those directions had proved successful. Their boat was heading towards Isle Amsterdam, and from the boat they could see the island approaching. So you see, the narrator became so happy. It is out there in front of us, they chorused. Everybody said, Come on, let's go to the deck and have a look at that island. Here, see, look, have a look. So, as big as a battleship, and the island was looking like a big battleship. So, I rushed on deck and gazed with relief at the stark outline of Isle Amsterdam. And hearing this, the narrator ran to the deck, and he was so relieved and he was so happy to see the outline of Isle Amsterdam. It was only a bleak piece of volcanic rock with little vegetation, the most beautiful island in the world. And the island was not very green. Actually, it had uh, become an island because of volcanic activities. A volcano had erupted, and over the years it had cooled down and become an island, and there were very less trees on it, and it was one of the most beautiful islands in the world. Most beautiful island because it proved to be a life saving island for all of them. So we anchored offshore for the night, and the next morning, all 28 inhabitants of the island cheered us as they helped us ashore. So during the night, they remained in the boat and they remained near the island. And next morning, all the 28 people living on the island came to help them. So you see, from their boat, they were taken to the island in a lifeboat. So with land under my feet, again my thoughts were full of Larry and Herbie. So you see, the moment he reached on land, he was so thankful to those professional sailors, Larry and Herbie. Both of them had worked dedicatedly. They were cheerful and optimistic under the direst stress, and of Mary, and who stayed at the wheel for all those crucial hours. And the narrator was thankful to his wife Mary, who had helped, the entire boat by steering it, in the time of difficulty. Most of all, I thought of a 7-year-old girl who did not want us to worry about a head injury, which subsequently took 6 minor operations to remove a recurring blood clot between skin and skull, and a 6-year-old boy who was not afraid to die. And he was most thankful to his daughter who had been injured, right? And in spite of being injured, she did not complain about her injury. And here in bracket we see she had to undergo 6 minor operations to remove the blood clotting from her brain. And he was also thankful to a 6-year-old boy who was his son, who was not afraid to die. So you see, uh, with this we have come to the end of the chapter. I hope you will enjoy listening to the chapter, and I will be sending along the notes. Kindly write those notes down in your fair notebooks. Thank you very much.